Hey guys, welcome to BADM 368. I'm sorry, 468, chapter 3. Super excited to welcome you back. And we are actually going to summarize chapters 3 and 4 in the same video. So be sure to stay all the way to the end. But in chapter 3, basically what we're talking about using our textbook, crafting and executing strategy, 20th edition. Can you see that? We're talking about how to evaluate a company's external environment. And so when you think about an external environment, that is everything that happens outside of the company. And there are some learning objectives that we want to take away and things we should understand by the time that we complete this chapter. And that is how to recognize the factors in a company's broad macro environment that may have strategic significance. Macro being like the big environment, the big picture, and then how to use analytic tools to diagnose the competitive conditions in a company's industry. So I'm looking down because I'm reading my book, just want to let you guys know that. And then how to map the market positions of key groups of industry rivals. Those are your competitors. And then how to use multiple frameworks to determine whether an industry's outlook presents a company with sufficiently attractive opportunities for growth and profitability. So it's really important to know your market and to know how strong your market is so that it will speak to your sustainability as an organization. Now, there are some great quotes on page 45, and I'm just going to read one by someone I really like a lot. His name is Michael Porter. He wrote a book. In fact, I have it here on my desk somewhere, but Michael Porter, he is a Harvard Business School professor and co-founder of Monitor Consulting. And he says, in essence, the job of a strategist is to understand and cope with competition. So how to understand and cope with competition. And that makes me think of Sun Tzu, The Art of War, and how we should study our enemies, study our rivals, and understand what their weak points are and their strengths so we know how to operate and how to win the battle. So just going on, the first section that the authors bring us to is the strategically relevant factors in the company's macro environment. Macro environment is in quotations because that comprises 6 components. And those factors, those 6 component factors of your macro environment as an organization are your political factors, things that happen within the government that could affect how our business is, how we do business, how we make money or not make money depending on what's happening. So you notice sometimes when there are major political coups in other countries or instability in the dollar, either in our country or European markets, then that can create an instability in the market. So political factors are key and relevant as it relates to how we do business, especially if a business has international ties and a multinational component. Next would be economic conditions in the firm's general environment, and that could be local, country, regional, or worldwide. So what makes me, what I think about there is I have a friend who is from a small town in Oklahoma, and Starbucks came to that town to open up. And, you know, Starbucks isn't cheap, if you will, for their drinks. Now, you can get a cup of coffee for about $1.50, $2, just black coffee. But when you talk about the specialty drinks, the frappuccinos, the macchiatos, the lattes, etc., that can be almost like $4, $5, $6 a cup. And that Starbucks actually ended up going out of business because people in that county were blue collar and didn't have a lot of money, had a fixed income, and also that type of culture in that small town, they pretty much have coffee at home or they go to a local diner. And so I believe that Starbucks may have failed to do their market research, if you will, to see how they could meet the economic conditions that were in that community, or if it would even have been feasible to set up shop there. Next, one of the other factors is sociocultural forces, technological factors, environmental factors, things concerning the natural environment, and of course, legal and regulatory conditions. So you can read more about those, but they give you a figure, they being the authors, on 3.1 about how we can think strategically about our company's situation when we choose a strategy. And then they go on to give you figure 3.2, which talks about the broad macro environment and how those 6 factors that we just discussed, the financial or economic, if you will, sociocultural, technological, environment, legal, and political, how they really circumference and encompass the immediate industry and competitive environment, which includes and encompasses suppliers, rival firms, new entrant buyers, substitute products, with the company being in the middle. So you'll be able to read more about that. But just again, know that your macro environment is the broad environmental context in which your company's industry is situated. And then they give you a PESTEL analysis, which is PESTEL, which is again those six forces that we went over. And now that's just exemplified by a table on page 48. One of the things I think is really interesting is if you turn over to page 49, talking about again, chapter 3, how to evaluate a company's external environment. There is a five forces model of competition, which is a key analytic tool. So this, I believe, will be part of your homework assignment for this week. Will be one of the questions. It's known as the five forces framework, and essentially it gives you these 5 points that create pressure to the company from different facets, if you will. And so the first is firms in other industries that offer substitute products. So that would be like a food line versus a Kroger or a grocery store. It says competitive pressures coming from these producers creates pressure in the environment and is a force, is a competitive force. And then also buyers. So if you are a company who has suppliers, then you can end up sometimes coming up short, if you will, as it relates to your ability to leverage your buying power, depending on what's happening on the buyer side or the seller side, because there are rivals amongst competing sellers. So an example of that would be Coca-Cola versus Pepsi. So they sell the same products and they vie for shelf space in the grocery store. So what you'll notice is if you go to the grocery store, I just challenge you to go this week and just kind of look and see where things are positioned in the shelving. That tells you who has a greater competitive advantage depending on whether Coke is at the top shelf, bottom shelf, or who's along the bottom. And typically you see either Coke or Pepsi, and then the lesser brands are towards the bottom, like your RC Colas and things like that. So then also there are competitive pressures stemming from the supplier's bargaining power. So the company has to really understand what is happening within their industry and be able to adjust fire strategically. And then potential threat of new entrants. So you think about an example there would be the coffee business, because there are now so many local coffee shops, mom and pop coffee shops that are setting up where it used to be that Starbucks might have been the only game in town, or Dunkin' Donuts or sort of the bigger players. But now we have home brewers, home roasters, people that are just doing mobile coffee carts and things of that nature. So there's a lot more competitor or rivalry entrance into the market than previously existed. So again, it just goes on to break down each one of those five factors, and we come up on the table on page 53. Common weapons for competing with rivals, and so this gives you the authors give you information on how what happens within the market strategically when you have a company who needs to understand how to compete with rivals. And I think, again, this class has wide reaching application for us, both personally and professionally. So as you're going through the course, I want you to think about what are some things that ways that you could maybe apply this to your own business if you're an entrepreneur or a budding entrepreneur, or just thinking about it in your workspace, organization. So some of the ways, I won't read them all, are discounting prices and holding clearance sales. So the primary effect is that the lower price increases total sales volume and market share. So basically you make your money up in volume. And then offering coupons, advertising items on sales, that increases sales volume and total revenues. It lowers the price and increases the unit cost, but it may lower your profit unit margin per sold, your profit margin per unit sold. So you have to be careful. And then one more is building a bigger, better dealer network. And that could have a primary effect of broadening access to buyers, boosting total sales volume, and market share may increase your unit cost. So the different ways that you can compete with rivals that have not all are not related to pricing, but maybe just new product entry and shifting how we do business. So then it goes on to page 55 to talk about factors that affect threat entry. And that could be high economies of scale, customers that have a strong brand preference. So an example there, I don't know about you guys, but like if I go to the store, certain products, I don't mind buying generic, but others, I'm not buying generic. So I think about when I went to Aldi recently, and it was so funny. We have here in the South, we're in North Carolina, so our Aldi's has Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce. And so when I was at Aldi's, they had the Sweet Baby Ray's, but they had Berman's, and Berman's was cheaper, so I bought Berman's. But it's so funny because Berman has the exact same label as Sweet Baby Ray's, but of course the name of the brand is different. So when I got home, I put it. My husband never pays attention when I put the groceries up, so I put the groceries up. But he and my son are the ones that eat the barbecue sauce, and so sent me an emoji with a mad face because it said really, because he realized when he went to eat the ketchup that or use the ketchup that it wasn't or their barbecue sauce that it wasn't Sweet Baby Ray's, it was a fake out. And so there's some people that just have a preference to brands. And then lastly, there might be restricted trade policy. So now I know if you guys are following politics, you recognize things that are coming out of China. If you order things on Amazon, they're taking a long time to get here, much longer than before. And that's because of the trade wars and the tariffs and the sanctions that are being placed. So all these things affect business and they affect the consumer as well and the supply chain. So I'm just thinking about that again, thinking about this from an external environment, things that could affect a company when we begin to evaluate the external environment. So the next they touch on are suppliers. It says that sometimes uh, suppliers actually have more bargaining power, and that can affect us as a company, or if you have a corporation, because that supplier can end up charging you higher rates justifiably by certain things. If the supplier products or services are in short supply, he has a stronger bargaining power because if you really want it, you're going to pay premium price. Or I'll just go to the next, if I'm the supplier, I'll go to the highest bidder. Another example might be that industry members do not have the potential to integrate backward in order to self-manufacture their own inputs. So they're at the mercy of the supplier and they can only get it from that supplier because that company may not have the capacity in-house to develop that product themselves. And industry members may not account for a big fraction of supplier sales, in which case the cost would be more. So those are just some things to think about. Factors that affect the bargaining power of buyers. So if you're a company who buys products, some things that could affect you externally are buyer demand is weak in relation to industry supply. The industry's products are standardized or undifferentiated, so you can get it anywhere. Buyers are large and few in number relative to the number of industry sellers, and buyers pose a credible threat of integrating backward into the business of sellers. So it's just something again for you to consider. Now, as we go on towards the end of the chapter, I think one of the things I just want to point out as we come to the end of chapter 3 is there are some forces that drive industry change. So again, talking about the external market, and that is changes in the industry's long-term growth rate, increasing globalization. So again, we're talking about doing business in international markets. So people are looking for cheaper, more efficient ways to do business. And so, of course, that takes jobs out of certain locations and areas and moves them into other countries or other states. Emerging new internet capabilities and applications. Wow. So from there, I think about how Amazon has basically put Books a Million out of business, Border Books, and now Barnes and Noble is really struggling because people order their books now on Amazon as well as other things. Shifts in buyer demographics. So you may start out with a specific client, and then that could shift depending on what's happening socioculturally. What I think about there is the whole vegan movement. I personally am also plant based. Before we also were gluten free. So as people began to think more about their health and thinking more about what's happening within certain industries, buyers' preferences shift. And if you're a company that say only provides meat, and now say 20%, 30% of your clients have become plant-based, of course, that's going to affect overall finances in the company. Or if you're a company who focuses on long-term care products, if you will, but now people are living longer or getting healthier, so then you don't have as many, say, sick people or people that need your services, that could cause a decrease in profitability. And then lastly, entry or exit of major firms. So that's huge. So I think about, again, how Walmart came on the scene. And Walmart pretty much, I feel like, single-handedly put Kmart, Sears, and companies like that have longevity and have been around for a long time, practically out of business. I think Sears is due to be bankrupt any day. And I don't know where you live, but Kmart has closed as well. And so just moving on towards the end of the chapter, I would just bring your attention to, let's see, what, on page 68 under strategic groups. So the author is going to introduce us to strategic groups and how they have different strategic group maps to assess the market positions of key competitors. So you want to know where your key competitors are located. And that group, strategic group, is defined as a cluster of industry rivals that have similar competitive advantages and market positions. So it's really important to know where that is set up. And then on page 71, you want to think about competitor analysis because you always want to do an analysis of your market. And again, not only know where your competitors and rivals are set up, but what do they have going on? And so figure 3.10 gives you a framework on how to analyze your competitors. So they look at how you want to look at the current strategy. So how the company is competing currently, their resources and capabilities, which is their key strengths and weaknesses, assumptions, held about itself in the industry, objectives from the standpoint of what are their strategic and performance objectives, and strategic moves, which are their actions and outcomes. So really important. And then one last concept is the key success factor, and that is the strategy elements, product and service attributes, operational approaches, resources, and competitive capabilities that are essential to surviving and thriving in the industry. So that wraps up chapter 3. That was a mouthful. Evaluating a company's external environment. And we're just going to go right into chapter 4. So this will be a bit of a longer video, but I feel like it might be more efficient to keep the chapters together since they're presented together every week. So in chapter 4, we'll go right into evaluating a company's resources, capabilities, and competitiveness. And the learning objectives are: we want to take stock of how well a company's strategy is working. We want to understand why a company's resources and capabilities are centrally important in giving the company a competitive edge over rivals. How to assess the company's strengths and weaknesses in light of market opportunities as well as external threats. And then look at how a company's value chain activities can affect the company's cost structure and customer value proposition. And then lastly, how a comprehensive evaluation of a company's competitive situation can help managers to make critical decisions and assess next moves. So let's do what we've been doing, is kind of looking at one of the quotes as a jump off point for chapter. And we'll pick the second one. I'm on chapter 4, page 79. So I invite you to join me there. And it says, this is a quote by C.C. Marketes and P.J. Williamson, who are London Business School professionals and professors. And they say only firms who are able to continually build new strategic assets faster and cheaper than their competitors will earn superior returns over the long term. So I think that's a great way to start. So then the way that chapter 4 sets out is thinking about 6 questions. So the author presents 6 questions that a company needs to use to evaluate and analyze themselves in terms of their resources, their capabilities, and their competitiveness. And so those questions are: how well is the company's present strategy working, which is critically important. You need to know where you are. Also, number 2, what are the company's most important resources and capabilities? And will they give the company a long-lasting competitive advantage over rival companies? 3, what are their strengths and weaknesses in relation to their market opportunities and external threats? So that sounds like a SWOT analysis to me. And then 4, how do a company's value chain activities impact its cost structure and customer value proposition? And then the last 2, is the company competitively stronger or weaker than their rivals? That is so important to note. And then 6, what strategic issues and problems merit front burner management attention? So that's really important. So essentially the way that the chapter is set up is throughout they take those questions, those 6 questions, and they break them down into subsets. Question 1, 2, 3, 4. So we'll just kind of go touch each of those questions. So again, the first question was: how well is the company's present strategy working? And the way that they assess that is using a figure 4.1 on page 80, and it's called identifying the components of a single business company's strategy. And so they take these key functional strategies, they take the business strategy, and they look at where a company stands in that particular moment, as well as looking at key financial ratios. And that will give a company indication of where they currently stand. Question number 2 is, what are the company's most important resources and capabilities, and how and will they give the company a long-lasting competitive advantage over rival companies? And so it's an essential element in deciding whether or not a company's overall situation is fundamentally healthy or unhealthy. Entails examining the attractiveness of its resources, meaning what does it own, what does it have, and its capabilities, meaning what is it able to achieve or do. And so they do that by looking at competitive assets, which it says are determinants of its competitiveness and its ability to succeed in the marketplace. So going on, when you as a manager or a leader assess your resources and your capabilities, it gives you a powerful tool in sizing up the company's competitive assets and determining whether they provide a foundation for success in the marketplace. So this is something that is critical to know and important for companies to do. And it's done in a two-step process. So the first step is to identify the resources and capabilities, and then the next step will be to examine. And so once you do that examination, then you come forward. So they just give some examples on page 85 of types of company resources, and those could be physical, financial, technological, organizational, of course, your human assets, your brand, your company image. Last two, relationships and company culture. So those are all really important. And so going on, again, question 3, there's more involved, but again, you're going to be reading this chapter, so I just want to summarize chapter 4, keeping in mind that we're talking about evaluating a company's resources, capabilities, and competitiveness. And so question 3 looks at what are the company's strengths and weaknesses in relation to the market opportunities and external threats. And that is, as I suspected, a SWOT analysis. So you'll learn about a SWOT analysis this week, and you'll also be utilizing this concept to complete one of your assignments and discussion boards. And so a SWOT analysis has to do with strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And you will assess a company based around those things and based around the industry as a whole and the company itself, so that you can determine your resource, where you stand from a resource, capability, and competitive standpoint. So you'll see a diagram of that on page 94. And then they also introduced to us the concept of a value chain, because that was one of our learning objectives. And a value chain, essentially, that is question 4, is how does a company's value chain activity impact its cost structure and customer value proposition? So a value chain is it identifies basically a company's primary activities and related support activities that create customer value, and it's exemplified in figure 4.3 on page 96. And then they give you also an illustration capsule using American Apparel in the production of their hoodie. So they take American Apparel and they look at their value chain, they being the authors of this book, and do an assessment. So I really encourage you to look at that, and then they see where they compare with their competitors in that same industry. And then going over, we are, I believe that question number 5 starts on page 104, and that question is the company competitively stronger or weaker than its key rivals? And they give you some ways to determine competitive strength or implications of strength. And those are, let's see, 5 areas that are represented that show how strong a company is from that standpoint. And that is the quality of their product and their performance, their reputation and brand image, technological skills, dealer network, new product innovation capability, because if you don't innovate, there's a whole thing around the business industry that innovate or die, which is key. You can look at Apple, the Apple phone, the iPhone, and the other companies that have gone out of business, Kodak, who didn't innovate when the digital camera era came, and now they're out of business. And so it's important for a company to be able to have that ability to innovate pretty quickly. Another way that they can weigh their competitive strength or assess is cost, customer service capability, and then financial resources. So all really key points. And then just lastly, our last question that we were asking, question 6, when we think about evaluating company resources, capabilities, and competitiveness, is what strategic issues and problems merit front burner managerial attention. So, what do I, as a leader, need to be focused on as it relates to my company? And so, basically, the authors are saying that the manager or the leader, organizational leader, if you will, should compile a worry list of problems so that they have strategic issues that they can then focus their attention on, and they must have a way to deal with these issues and obstacles that stand in the way of the company so that the company can be viable and successful in the year ahead. So once they have this worry list, they need to then go and categorize it and put it in the order of course, one being the most present or prevalent, up, down through, 10, 20, etc. And so really that is the end of chapter 6, excuse me, chapter, getting ahead, chapter 4, that was question number 6, on how you can evaluate a company's resources, capabilities, and competitiveness. So I know we went a little bit fast, but that is because this is just a summary, and you will actually be doing this on your own this week, reading this chapter, chapters 3 and 4, and completing the corresponding assignments and discussion boards and tests. And don't forget your self-assessment. Again, in your discussion boards, you want to make sure that you respond to another student to get full credit for the post. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to email me at carterp@campbell.edu. Take care, and I'll see you next week.